Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, October 18th. This is Africa 54.
Ethiopian and Eritrean forces have captured Shire and two other Tigray cities in an ongoing conflict the UN Secretary General says has to stop now. Burkina Faso's coup backers admit they're not able to stop a growing Islamist insurgency that has killed more civilians this year than in all of 2021. VOA's Henry Wilkins is there. Africa's high breast cancer mortality rate due to late diagnosis, inadequate treatment, and other factors is the focus of a strong response by Ghana. All this and much more on today's Africa 54.
The United Nations, African Union, and the U.S. State Department are calling for an immediate end to the war in Ethiopia's Tigray region. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling for a return to peace talks, and he is asking all sides to protect civilians and adhere to international law. Africa 54's Paul Ndiho has more.
Ethiopian government forces and their allies have captured Shire, one of the biggest cities in the northern region of Tigray. The violence in Tigray, which has spilled over into neighboring regions and drawn the Eritrean military, has killed thousands of civilians, uprooted millions, and left hundreds of thousands facing a possible famine. Shire is about 140 kilometers northwest of Tigray's regional capital, Mekelle, and hosts tens of thousands of people displaced from other areas by the conflict. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate end to the hostilities in Tigray.
The situation in Ethiopia is spiraling out of control. Violence and destruction have reached alarming levels. The social fabric is being ripped apart. Hostilities in the Tigray region of Ethiopia must end now.
Guterres told reporters the United Nations would support the African Union as it seeks to find a solution to end the fighting.
The United Nations is ready to support the African Union in every possible way to end this nightmare for the Ethiopian people. We need the urgent resumption of talks towards an effective, lasting political settlement.
The African Union, in a statement, called for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and the resumption of humanitarian services. The U.S. Department of State also weighed into the conflict by urging all sides to refrain from any further military operations.
We call on the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and the Eritrean Defense Forces to immediately halt their joint military offensive and for Eritrea to withdraw its forces from northern Ethiopia. And we further call on the Tigrayan Defense Forces to cease any additional provocations at this time. It's incumbent on all of those involved to respect and protect civilians, and we call on them to allow unhindered humanitarian access to all Ethiopians in need.
The Ethiopian government and army, the Eritrean government, and the Tigray People's Liberation Front has not responded to requests for comment on the events in Shire by the Voice of America. In a post on Twitter, the Ethiopian Foreign Affairs Ministry said, quote, "The TPLF is responsible for the current situation in northern Ethiopia, as it intentionally reignited the war for the third consecutive time in a row. Peace talks between the warring parties were due to take place earlier this month in South Africa, but postponed due to logistical and technical issues." Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Now, for more on the UN concerns over the war in Ethiopia, I'm joined live from New York by VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bishia. Margaret, so much condemnation from international bodies there. What's the latest from the United Nations on this Ethiopia-Tigray conflict?
Well, as you heard in Paul's report, there's concerns about Shire And we just heard from the Secretary General's spokesman that they have reports about possible mass movements of people in that area, and they're very concerned about them, about their safety, about fighting, civilians caught in fighting in that area. The UN Secretary General is continuing contacts with the African Union at all levels. And the UN Security Council will meet on Friday morning in a private meeting to discuss the situation in Ethiopia. This meeting was requested by the 3 African members of the council, Gabon, Ghana, and Kenya. I understand from diplomats that there was a bit of pushback from Ethiopia. They didn't want this meeting to happen, but it appears to be scheduled now and going ahead on Friday.
Margaret, what has been the response of the Ethiopian ambassador to the United Nations regarding Secretary General's remarks?
Well, he wasn't happy about them. He tweeted on Monday after the Secretary General spoke. He said that the Secretary General's statement was unwarranted, that it was exaggerated assertions, it did not reflect reality. He said it would undermine the AU-led peace effort and the ability of the UN to play a positive and constructive role in Ethiopia.
And what's the United Nations saying about the humanitarian situation in Ethiopia? We know in the past people rallied together, the international community, to help Ethiopians during the famine. Is there any kind of response so far on what's going on the ground?
Sure. Well, concerns continue to grow over the humanitarian situation, which has been bad in the north for the past 2 years of this conflict, but it's also bad in other parts of the country, particularly in the south, where unprecedented drought is affecting millions of people there. In the north of Ethiopia, there are 9 million people who need humanitarian assistance, but in the south, it's nearly as bad. There are about 8 million who need some sort of assistance, and then you have nearly 6 million internally displaced people across the country who also need help. So it's just a mammoth task for humanitarians. The UN has asked for about $3 billion this year to meet the needs. It's only about 40% funded so far, and the year is nearly over for planning purposes. And in the north in particular, it's very hard to reach large areas because of fighting. A lot of areas are inaccessible, and the UN has its own humanitarian air fleet, and that fleet has been grounded since August 25th when the fighting resumed, when the ceasefire was broken. So it's really been a difficult situation for humanitarians, not to mention that it's difficult for them too and dangerous. The International Rescue Committee had a staffer who died of his injuries while distributing aid in Shire just on Saturday.
Right. Margaret, thank you so much. VOA correspondent Margaret Bashir reporting live from the United Nations. The United Nations Children's Fund says one child is being admitted for medical treatment for malnutrition every minute in Somalia. A severe drought threatens to cause the deaths of children on a scale not seen in 50 years. The situation in Somalia appears to be worse now than in 2011, when famine killed more than 250,000 people in the Horn of Africa country, according to Unicef spokesman James Elder. The last 4 rainy seasons in the Horn of Africa region have failed, making this the worst drought in 40 years. The crisis is being exacerbated by Al-Shabaab terrorist attacks and high global food prices. The United Nations Children's Fund says one child is being admitted for medical treatment for malnutrition every minute in Somalia. A severe drought threatens to cause the deaths of children on a scale not seen in half a century. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder says the latest admission rates from August shows 44,000 children admitted with severe malnutrition. For more insight, I'm joined live by UNICEF spokesman James Elder. James, welcome to Africa 54.
Hi there, Esther. Good evening.
Good evening, James. Now, your report here is very alarming. Tell us how did Somalia get there?
It's terrifying. How to get here? Look, Esther, there is, as you say, there's insecurity and the challenges of working in a place like this with Al-Shabaab. Everything, of course, is exacerbated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the spike that's meant to food prices and people who don't have a lot of financial leverage and so on to see fuel and food prices rise. But let's be clear, the greatest impact here that's pushing hundreds of thousands of people to the brink is a climate crisis. You know, we are now seeing the effects, Esther, I think, of excesses in other parts of the world, the rich world, and the world's poorest children, the children I'm seeing here today in Somalia, they're starting to pay for this. So this is climate-induced, as you rightly say, drought after drought after drought, and families have run out of options. They had good livelihoods. Livestock has died in front of them. They hold on as long as they can, and then they realize they have to move, having lost their livestock, which was their livelihood.
James, what is UNICEF's response to this crisis to help save these children?
Yeah, it's huge, and it's increasing every day, Esther. I mean, malnutrition, which is both a combination of making sure we reach those children, going out to try and reach them, which is difficult, again, back on the insecurity issue, but places like where I am as well, we have a lot of stabilization centers, health clinics, and it's a magic, you know, highly nutritious paste called ready-to-use therapeutic food, and getting that to children. You see those malnourished boys and girls turn around. Now, we've treated 300,000 children this year alone, but water is so critical too. When a child's malnourished, you know, unclean water, a disease, measles, something, makes them about 10 times more likely to die. So UNICEF, in the last 3 months, we've reached 500,000 people with clean water. But this has to go on every single day because the needs are so great. I've got to say, the heroic efforts of mothers to get children to help, the responsibility to me is so very clear why we must help them.
James, thank you so much for your insight and for that report. James Elder is UNICEF's spokesperson. Backers of Burkina Faso's latest coup cite the military's failure to stem a deadly Islamist insurgency that is spreading across the Sahel and has displaced millions of people as the reason for the leadership change. Henry Wilkins reports from Melu, Burkina Faso.
War has raged between Western Sahel countries and Islamic State and Al-Qaeda militants for more than a decade. This social media video purports to show militants carrying out a massacre at a Burkina Faso military base last year. Analysts say failure to stop attacks helped spark 2 coups in Burkina Faso this year. Both military juntas that carried out the coups cited the inability of the previous government to improve security.
There was this expectation that a military leader would perform better than a civilian one. What we've seen instead is that since January, the security situation has continued to deteriorate.
All over the Western Sahel, governments are losing the war with militants. Data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project shows that more civilians died because of the conflict in the first half of 2022 than in the whole of 2021. In Burkina Faso, one of the previous military junta's flagship policies for reducing violence was to create military interest zones. It called for civilians within conflict-affected provinces to leave for a period so the army could carry out operations against any remaining terrorists. VOA travelled close to one of the military zones and met Jonas Sawadogo, who says he was forced to leave his home because of the policy.
It was the government's decision. It's not what we wanted. The military should have come and done something before it got to this point. Since we have left, we have no idea what they've done to protect our village.
Gregor Sawadogo says he has received no support from the government since leaving his home, also in a military zone.
Since I left, I have been working as a labourer with stonemasons. I get about $4 a day to feed my family. My mother, my wife and my 4 children. I have to pay rent too.
Despite the terrible violence and more than 2.6 million displaced in the Western Sahel, aid workers worry this war will become a forgotten crisis. Sandra Latouf is the representative for UNICEF in Burkina Faso. She just returned from Djibo, a town in the country's north, where terrorists for months have blocked deliveries of food. Trucks carrying supplies can be seen here halted because it is too dangerous to travel on the road to the north. One convoy was recently attacked. She says children in Djibo are starving to death.
And it's really, it's a big hurt to see that children have suffering, the population have suffering. We need to talk about Burkina Faso. We need to talk about the Sahel. This is a situation that needs attention of the world.
As the war in the Sahel intensifies, attacks by militants have begun to spread to coastal West African countries, the next phase in the jihadists' efforts to destabilise the region. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Melu, Burkina Faso.
South African state-owned logistics firm Transnet says it has agreed to a 3-year wage deal with the union representing the majority of its workers. The action ends a 2-week strike that had hit commodities exports and piled up millions in losses. We get more in this report from Reuters.
Logistics firm Transnet says it has agreed to a 3-year wage deal with the union representing most of its workers. The deal ends a 2-week strike that significantly slowed down commodities exports from the country's ports and piled up millions in losses. United Transport and allied trade union members were demanding a pay increase linked to South Africa's more than 7% inflation rate. Transnet agreed to a 6% increase for this year, a 5.5% raise next year, and a further 6% boost in 2024. The company says its priority now will be clearing backlogs and getting out urgent cargo. Union officials were not immediately available for comment.
Right, that report was filed by Reuters. In other news, South Sudanese army forces have been deployed to a border region to try to end fighting between communities from the disputed Abyei area and Warrap State's Twig County. 2 United Nations peacekeepers were killed and 4 injured in northern Mali on Monday by a highway bomb. Their vehicle hit an improvised explosive device during a mine search and detection patrol. And the UN Organizations for Human and Animal Health, Food and the Environment issued their first joint action plan aimed at detecting and tackling the next potential pandemic. The proposal is officially launching Tuesday at the World Health Summit in Berlin, Germany. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce's U.S. Africa Business Center is convening its first annual Africa Digital Innovation Competition for African startups. VOA is working as a media partner with the Africa Business Center on this initiative. Out of 17,000 candidates in 50 countries across Africa, 10 finalists were selected, and for the next 2 weeks we'll bring you a look at each one. In today's profile, we highlight Benjamin Bais Asiedu from Ghana, whose startup TraderX uplifts small-scale farmers and helps increase their commodity reach in their communities and abroad.
I'm Benjamin Bais Asiedu. I'm 32 years old from Accra, Ghana. I'm the CEO and co-founder of TraderX Ghana Limited. Now, the Digital Innovation Competition is, to us, a prestigious competition and also gives a cash investment. I think furthermore, it also provides its winners with mentorship, and that for us, is more than we actually were looking for. So it was more than a perfect fit for us. The distinction to be a part of the top 10 in the whole of Africa for us really validates the potential of our mission and our vision at TraderX to support smallholder farmers in Africa. So TraderX is basically an agricultural commodity trading company. Essentially, what we are actually doing is uplifting smallholder farmers and their communities by elevating their production and boosting trade of their commodities to the wider international markets, and we are doing that through formalized exchanges. For the farmers, we are supporting them and providing them with services that will improve their yields, will reduce their post-harvest losses, and ultimately help them to earn more and do less manual work. For the market right now, as the world is clamoring for new sources of commodities, TraderX is connecting local farmers to the wider international market to meet this demand. The first thing we will do if we win the competition, we will celebrate. Having an endorsement or this type of endorsement from such a prestigious third party will be invaluable to our fundraising efforts.
Tomorrow on Africa 54, we'll profile Kenya's David Jonjo and his startup Grow Agric. It's time for Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with the latest on breast cancer in Africa. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. The latest global cancer data reveals a high mortality rate of breast cancer in Africa. Reasons include lack of access to adequate treatment, myths and misconceptions about the disease, and late diagnosis. Experts say women of African descent are at higher risk of dying from breast cancer. Efforts are now underway in Ghana to lower the incidence of breast cancer in the country. Take a look. Breast cancer is the top cancer for women globally. Data from the World Cancer Research Fund International shows that there were more than 2.26 million new cases of breast cancer in women in 2020. Experts say at least 80% of people survive breast cancer in North America. In low-income countries, it is less than 50%, and black women are more at risk. Dr. Beatrice Adai is the president of Breast Care International, a Ghana-based, not-for-profit breast cancer advocacy organization.
We do have a lot of triple-negative disease. The black Americans also do have, but it's because we have the same roots.
Researchers have identified biological links between African ancestry and triple-negative breast cancer. Scientists say it is more aggressive and more likely to spread beyond the breast and to come back after treatment than other types of breast cancer. They say more research is needed on breast cancer among women of African descent so they can have better prevention and treatment options specific to their needs. In Ghana, pathologist Dr. Kafui Akapo works with Yamachi Biotech, a homegrown research and diagnostics startup.
If you look at every study across the world, there are very few of them who are Africans. So what this does is that you come to the African population and study it, and that has effects on African Americans and any other group that has a basis in Africa. That's why this is so important. Without it, you don't have enough to relate to African breast cancer.
October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month globally, a moment to raise awareness and support about breast cancer. In this regard, Ghana hosted the 10th Annual National Breast Cancer Ghana Walk, an event organized by Breast Care International that brings together thousands of people in different parts of the country. This year, the event took place at Tepa in the Ahafo-Ano North District under the theme, Breast Cancer Won't Rest, so why should we?
Our mothers, our sisters, our grandmothers, our daughters, our friends are dying needlessly from this disease. Those of us at Breast Care International, the Peace and Love Hospitals, have decided to wage a war against breast cancer in our country and in Africa.
Medical experts say age, obesity, inactivity, and alcohol use can increase the chances of developing breast cancer, and early detection and prompt action can increase the chances of survival. Joining us via phone from Kumasi, Ghana for more insight is breast surgeon Dr. Beatrice Adai, President of Breast Care International and founder of the Peace and Love Hospitals in Ghana. Dr. Adai, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Triple-negative breast cancer is said to be more common among black women. What is your experience with patients in Ghana?
Thank you so much. Let me thank VOA for throwing the light on breast cancer in Ghana and in Africa. Yes, indeed, a lot of our women are diagnosed with triple-negative disease, which is difficult to treat. But our problem is the late-stage presentation. If women will come early, whether it's triple negative or CR positive, we have about between 30 to 40% of the cases are triple negative. And so we need to create more awareness to get our patients to the hospitals early enough.
So awareness is something that you've been doing for many years. You just held the 10th edition of your Walk for the Cure. What has been the impact of such an initiative on the ground?
Thank you so much. It has been great. At least every woman in Ghana or everybody in Ghana has heard about breast cancer and they know what to do. The issue is whether they are doing it or not. But we still have to continue creating the awareness. Awareness creation and education is something we can do, we need to do to remove the fear and the stigma surrounding breast cancer and to encourage women to go to hospital early.
So when women respond to the awareness, what can they do concretely to lower the incidence, to lower their chances of developing breast cancer? What can be done really? Because it seems like up until now, scientists cannot really pinpoint causes.
Yes. So because we don't know the exact cause of breast cancer, we cannot do primary prevention. But we can do secondary prevention, which we term as early detection and prompt action. Early detection and prompt action is our preventive tool. And here in the low-resource country, we don't have enough infrastructure, we don't have enough personnel. So prevention is our tool. And so that is where we have to put in a lot of effort to let people know that if you go to hospital early, you can be treated, you can be cured.
And one final message in 10 seconds, Dr. Wiafie?
Thank you. If breast cancer will not rest, why should we and how can we? So let us continue the awareness creation. Let us support the patients and the survivors with breast cancer. They need our support, financial and social support. Okay. And that will help us to get a lot of people surviving the disease.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Beatrice Wiafie Adai is president of Breast Care International. She was joining us from Kumasi, Ghana. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Mudu. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Lino. Be sure to watch Lino Mudu's health reports every Tuesday on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.